Yesterday, we completed chapter 14 with saying that during the third year of the 7-year cycle, you have to share your crops with the Levi, with the Yatom, the Almanah, with the people who don't have large swaths of land or don't have families to take care of them. And thus, chapter 15 continues with more sense of social justice that needs to be done. And thus it begins, Mikate Sheva Shanim Ta'aseh Shmita. Every seventh year, you have to practice the remission of debts. This is the nature of the remission. All creditors shall remit the due that they have against their fellow. They cannot collect from their fellow because the remission of debts is proclaimed by God. There's a question there: is it that the debt is fully canceled, or is that you just can't collect on it? But then, in theory, there still is a debt. Either way, it doesn't matter. I cannot collect the money that I owe to you if when the Shemitah year comes. And of course, that changed the lending behavior of the Jewish people. They knew that debts would be canceled at the Shemitah year, and of course, it ultimately came to things like the Pruzbul that Hillel had to enact during the time of the second Beit Hamikdash, because credit had dried up. Nobody wanted to lend anybody money, so the poor couldn't borrow money to get businesses started, to help them get out of debt, because the rich knew they wouldn't get their money back. And so Hillel came up with the idea of the Pruzbul. But back here with the Torah, what's at the core of it is this idea of the Torah that we can't let people continuously fall. There has to be a time where there has to be debt relief, there has to be remission of debt, we have to return land, in order that there are certain people who don't get too wealthy and other people who don't get too poor. Let's continue in verse 3. You are allowed to collect from a foreigner, but whatever is owed to your fellow Jew needs to be forgiven. So this is the rule that we have when it comes to the Jewish community. All debts need to be forgiven. There shall be no needy among you, since God will bless you in the land that God is giving to you. So the Torah here tries to say that there's not going to be any needy. Now we know that maybe it won't be completely destitute. We know, of course, there will always be needy, and the Torah will, of course, say that in a few verses. When will there be no needy? If you completely listen to all of the rules, all of the instructions of God. If you build a just society, there will not be any needy people. Everybody will have enough, because God will bless you as He has promised you. You'll extend loans to many nations, but require none for yourself. You will dominate many nations, but they will not dominate you. So the Torah just a few verses ago said that there won't be an Evyon, and now it says, yes, there will be people who are needy. Amongst your in your cities, do not harden your heart or shut your hand against the needy. Don't close your hand up. Open your hand to give, and lend him what is sufficient to meet the need. The amount of money doesn't have to pay his electricity bill, to pay her mortgage. You have to help them in that way. Open your hand, be open to them, to understand their pain and their suffering. Beware lest you harbor an evil, a base thought, and you say, the seventh year is approaching, and therefore, you're going to be bad to the poor. You won't give to them. And here it doesn't sound like you're giving. It's not charity, but it sounds like you're lending them money. You're giving them money to help them get off of pay their bills, and then hopefully, start new work, and then they'll be able to pay back. But we're worried the Shemitah is coming, and you're not going to lend them money because you know that they will not have to pay back. If this happens, then the poor person who you don't lend money to will call out to God, and you will incur guilt. And the guilt from God, punishment from God, will be much worse than losing the $100 or whatever you were going to lend and presumably not get back. Now, you must Give it to them. And don't have any regrets. Don't make it bad. When the Rambam talks about the different levels of charity, one of the higher levels is, or one of the things that's important is when you give the charity, to give it, not to give it begrudgingly, it shouldn't be ra levavcha. It shouldn't be something that you do, oh, this is terrible. You should give it with a sense of joy that you're the one giving and not the one asking. For in return, God will bless you in all your efforts and everything that you do. And here, even though we said earlier, there won't be an Evyon, maybe if we are able to build the perfect just society, there won't be an Evyon. We have not achieved that yet, and thus there will always be needy in our midst. Which is why I'm commanding you to open up your hand to the poor, to the needy in your land. Open up your hand to them, help them out, and society will benefit. So now we're going to go from there to another sense of social justice, another sense of helping out family members, people who have fallen on very difficult times. If a Hebrew man or woman is sold to you, they're sold because maybe they stole and they were unable, they don't have the capacity to pay back their debts, and thus to pay off their debt, they are sold into slavery. In the seventh year, just like all debts are forgiven, so here too, this is in a sense as a debt, they are freed. When you set them free, do not send them empty-handed. Furnish him with flocks, with grains, with oil, with the things that God has blessed you. We know this, right? Think post-slavery, the blacks were freed, but then what were they supposed to do? They had no way to get ahead, so they're free, but they have nothing. Maybe the shirt on their back at most. How are they supposed to? The African Americans in the South, how are they supposed to build a life when they had nothing given to them? And remember, verse 15, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and I redeemed you, God says, and therefore you should remember this mitzvah. And what should you remember? Part of it, when God tells Bnei Yisrael, go to the Egyptians and ask them for clay kesef, v'chlei zahav, usmalot. Go ask them for gold and silver. You're leaving Egypt, but you have nothing. How will you be able to build a land? How will you be able to build a life if you have no capacity, no ability to move forward? You'll just be back in slavery. And thus, when you send out your slave, you have to send them out with an ability for them to now build a life on their own. Continuing, however, let's say they're worried. But if they say to you, I don't want to go free, my life before was so difficult. Now, why do you think I stole? Why do you think I ended up in slavery? Here I have a roof over my head. I love your family. You treat me nicely. So you bring him to the doorpost, and you punch a hole through his ear, and that is the sign that this slave remains free in perpetuity, whether it be a male slave or a female slave. The rabbis comment that olam here does not mean forever until the person dies, but it means until the Jubilee in the Yovel year. Even the slave who wants to remain in their master's house every 50th year needs to goes free. When you do set him free, don't be upset. Don't be upset that you're setting him free. Don't be upset that you have to send him with gifts to start life again, because this person served you. They worked for you for 6 years. And God, therefore, will bless you because you are sending a person free. And it's interesting to note, there's a rabbinic commentary, I believe it's in the Gemara Yerushalmi, that back in Sefer Shmot, when God tells Moshe to free the slaves, he says, go speak to Bnei Yisrael and to Paro, to free the slaves and to let them exit from Egypt. And there's this Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi says that it wasn't only Pharaoh, but there were Jews who even had slaves. There were Israelites in Egypt who had slaves of other Israelites. You don't want to be under the yoke of Pharaoh. You must send your slaves free first. You must let them go free. And thus, if you want to be joyous, if you want to succeed in the land of Israel, then you need to know when you have to set people free and how to let them go and help lead their lives. Continuing in verse 19, call the you shall consecrate to God all your male firstborn in your herd and your flock. You must not work your first ox or shear your first sheep. You and your household shall eat it annually, bashana. You have to eat it in the place that God will choose. Of course, we know later becomes Jerusalem, but at this point, God has not mentioned it's the place that God shall choose. Sacrifices need to be perfect. They can be lame or blind. They can have a defect. Those you do not sacrifice. Those you eat as a regular sacrifice, like the gazelle, the deer, right? Those animals you can slaughter, you can shecht, but you cannot bring them up to Jerusalem as sacrifices that are kadosh to God. Raket damolo tochel, but even with what you are allowed to eat in your home, whether it be up and down, whether it be south in Beersheba, whether it be on the coast, whether it be on the Jordan River, there are certain things you can eat, and amongst those is the dam, the blood. Ala aretz tishbechenu kamayim. The blood you have to throw onto the ground. We've had this before. The idea that blood is the life force, is the vitality of the animal, and it's an affront to eating the blood. Maimonides and others say that there was something with the blood that had to do with idolatry. So there are a variety of different reasons that are given, but we're told that there are certain aspects of certain pieces, right? We know there are the inner fats you're not allowed to eat. So there are certain parts of the animal, even though Torah says you do not have to be vegan or vegetarian, you're allowed to eat meat. You cannot eat anything you want. There are rules, like with most other things in the Torah, there are rules that are govern even the things that are permitted.